Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. Today, I'm joined by Tom Francis, Head of Personal Finance at Octopus Money, to talk about financial transparency in relationships and why it matters even more if things head towards divorce. We start by unpacking what financial transparency actually means. Then Tom shares practical ways to get a clear picture of your own money as a first step. We also dig into why talking about money feels so awkward for so many of us in the UK, how to approach those conversations more calmly with your partner, and what healthy openness can look like if a relationship does end. And to wrap up, Tom shares his 3 top tips for building better financial transparency from here. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's so nice to be here. I've been really looking forward to this.
It's lovely to have you. And I think it's just so important that this whole idea of, money advice for all is really, where you're anchored and where your heart lies, because that's exactly what it's like at Amicable. We're trying to help people a sort of an every person platform rather than just being an exclusive platform. So it's great because today we're going to talk about the relationship between money and divorce, which is a massive one. It's usually one of the biggest things people worry about. And more importantly, we're going to talk a little bit more broadly about how money and relationships go together. So even if you're not quite at the point of divorcing, we're hopefully going to get some top tips about what kind of relationship you should be having with money and your partner and how those things fit together. So the context is financial transparency. And I guess, as I just said, it doesn't necessarily start at the point of relationship breakdown, but sort of transparency, how we talk about money, how we feel about money is really part and parcel of our relationship almost from day one, isn't it? Like even who buys the drinks on the first date, you're already making a statement about money. So let's start there. Give us a definition. What does financial transparency actually mean in a relationship?
Yeah, really good question. And I think you can think about financial transparency on a couple of different levels. Now, I think where most people's minds go to are who owns what and does their partner know what those things are? At its kind of simplest, you could define transparency as that. But actually, you could also kind of look at financial transparency as being clear about how a partner approaches and thinks about money just as much as what they actually hold. Because I think, as I'm sure we'll come on to throughout this episode, often people are looking for a perfect solution to financial transparency and a set of rules that the entire globe should live by. But the nature of us as really complex, kooky humans is that actually there tends to be a variety of different ways that we can approach these kind of things. And so I think one of the key kind of ingredients for me and financial transparency is just understanding how your partner approaches money and thinks about it, as opposed to starting from the place of it needs to be black and white about where everything is and where it's going.
I think that's so interesting because, obviously in the world of divorce, when you're looking at sorting out finances, there is a requirement, a legal requirement to do what's called a full and frank and open disclosure of your assets. And you're right, that is where most of us normally start when we're thinking about financial transparency. Has he or she declared that bank account I sort of know they've got, but we've never talked about? Am I absolutely confident about what their bonus is or was this year, last year from work? And it's those things we tend to get hung up on. And it's right because everybody that goes through a divorce, if they're having what's called a consent order, where you're sorting out money, property, assets, pensions, all of that sort of thing, the starting point for that is a full and frank and open disclosure. So yes, there has to be this recording of what everyone's got. But I love your point, because to just do that, as you say, is almost to miss the point, isn't it? Understanding your partner's relationship with money as you go into the idea of trying to separate it in quotes, unquotes, a fair way, that is more important, I would say, than whether or not you've recorded every single last penny.
Exactly. And I would say that if anybody is listening and in a relationship or going through a separation, one thing I'd love to be clear about is the relationship between yourself and your finances does need to be transparent, and you need to know kind of what you hold and where. I would actually be a little bit harsh and say there aren't too many excuses that you can make about understanding what you hold. It might take effort and it might be difficult, but I would start by trying to make sure at least you're clear about your own savings and finances and pensions. But then in terms of your partner, trying to be clear about how they kind of view their finances and have that relationship, I think is such a solid building block for financial transparency. And hey, for some relationships and customers that I've worked with in the past, that might well mean that it is having an absolute awareness of where every penny is held of your partner. That works for some people. For other people, there could be a slightly different approach. And again, I think that's okay as long as you have that shared understanding of how you are thinking about finances. Where I've seen difficulties come into relationships and how they're approaching their finances tends to be when each partner either had never had the conversation about finances, or there's just a fundamental difference in approach of how they're viewing savings. So I hate to answer your original question as one that's kind of me sitting on the fence, but genuinely there are so many different approaches that I've seen have worked in different relationships.
That's super interesting. I'm just going to challenge one thing that you said there at the beginning, this idea that there are no excuses for not knowing your own finances. I guess the difficulty there is often something we see working with couples is that sometimes in a marriage, people take on different roles, and it can be one person's role to sort the finances out. And I know even in my own experience, there's a couple of occasions where, my kids were very young. I just had one of them. The other was a toddler, where I didn't know where we had what ISAs my husband had invested and put in my name. I didn't know any of that. I just was in a different world. So I guess there'll be people listening who might be in that scenario where it hasn't been their designated role to do the finances. I guess what you're saying is if that's the scenario, as I found as well, you have to go on a pretty steep learning curve to get ahead on or your head around what it is you have got in your name, what's in your partner's name, and all of that kind of stuff. That's quite daunting, isn't it? So, as a money coach, how do you help somebody like me in those days where I'm just kind of like a bit of a headless chicken or a rabbit in the headlights thinking, hello, my lovely listeners. I hope you're finding this episode helpful and comforting. I just wanted to take a moment to share some news. I've written a book and it's called Amicable Divorce. It's a practical guide to separating with dignity, supporting your children and navigating finances and co-parenting without unnecessary conflict. It's all the guidance you can usually find on the podcast and much more. If that sounds helpful, you can pre-order it today on Amazon. Thanks so much, and now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, no two ways about it. It is difficult. I like to think the trend of how difficult it is. I hope, and I'm optimistic, that it is getting less difficult as the years go by, primarily in terms of it should be easier than it has been in the past to get your hands on these kind of bits of information, whether that be through online accounts or documentation. Trying to obtain access to those kind of things is an amazing start. And then I think it's about making sure that you have access, if needed, to help and independent help. That there are many free services that are available that are kind of hosted by the government and the Money and Pensions Service, or there are services of the likes of Octopus Money, who, regardless of background or circumstance, you can speak to us and we will try and give you some help. But I totally take your point, Kate, that there are going to be scenarios where it's a really daunting challenge about trying to kind of get to at least clarity on your own finances. And so my tidbit of advice is break it down into something really small and manageable. Don't feel like you're going to solve that problem in a day. It's going to take time. And so celebrate your small wins. And that small win might be, hey, you got the first statement through, or you got the first login details to an account that you knew existed. Take that as the win. That's a step in the right direction. Don't feel like everything needs to be sorted from the get-go.
Well, are there, I guess, one of the things that I'm kind of reflecting on as we're sort of talking is some of these conversations I feel like I should have had before I even got married to the person I was going to marry. And I didn't have a money conversation. I've been married twice. I didn't have a money conversation either time. So no points for me then. But why don't we have those conversations? What's wrong with me?
I mean, I'd say nothing is wrong with you. It's absolutely not a you or anyone listening problem. It's a UK thing. I think that as a nation, and arguably as human beings, these are difficult conversations to have. And for many people, and it was roughly the point I was trying to make previously, where it's amazing to understand your partner's approach to finances, but many people don't understand their own approach to finances. So that's something that takes work and takes effort. So I think that the starting point, I would say, is, as a nation, we are not taught intricately about finances growing up. It's, there are great green shoots, but the reality is it's not a fixture on our curriculum at the moment. The point I'll often make is I can still recall Pythagoras, but holy, I've got no idea how a payslip works when I went into my first role. And so I'd portion some of the blame in our education system where we don't talk too much about personal finances. I think the other nature of money and just how woven it is with our emotions is that actually money can reflect a lot of our kind of anxieties in life. Now, whether that be a need for independence, that's something that's highly kind of attached to our financial position, our relationships with money growing up, and what our families were like, and how they managed finances. And even thinking about that dynamic with your kind of upbringing, often people think, oh, maybe you mirror how your family might have approached money. But speaking from personal experience, I've gone the polar opposite than my upbringing, where my parents were incredible parents, but when it came to finances and planning, car crash. And I don't think they'd mind me saying this. They have always been extremely spontaneous and kind of fly by the seat of their pants. It has pushed me the total opposite way, that I am so, some would say, boring. Others would say I've become a real planner, and wanting to know where things sit, and if things go wrong over the next 5 years, how could my finances cope? So there are all of these strands, I think, that come together, which ultimately play out as it being quite difficult to approach finances as a topic really openly with a new partner or someone that you're in a relationship with.
But so in that, and we'll come back to divorce in a minute, but just starting off relationships, is it a conversation you need to have within weeks of meeting somebody? And what are you actually asking them? What are we expected to say?
Yeah, really good question. I think I wouldn't say it's a conversation in the first couple of weeks. I think it's worthwhile trying to have it as early as possible. And where I would probably ground that conversation in is less to do with the how much have you got in your bank account, but more to do with, what does a great life look like over the next 5 to 10 years? What are three amazing things that you would love to achieve in that time? And that will often then give you an insight into what someone might be planning for, or what kind of success might look or feel like. And that's probably where I would start. And again, similar to something I mentioned before, try and answer those questions yourself. To somebody listening, we see it time and again in Octopus Money that the very first time that we meet with a customer, generally what we'll say is, what's an amazing life look like from here? So fewer people can answer that quickly. And often it will take a bit of work from our coaches to really try and eke out what success or a great life looks like. And really interestingly, it becomes so easy if we flip that question on its head and say, what's a really rubbish next 10 years look like to you? Whew, 5 things straight away, no problems answering that. And so those kind of questions, I think, can be a really powerful way to start having those conversations.
That's really interesting because at the beginning of the divorce or separation process, we ask people, what, when the dust has settled, what will good look like? Where will you be? What will you be doing? And we get them to paint this picture, because the more vividly they can paint that picture, the more guidance we have then about what a good settlement looks like. Because if we're just going on what a good settlement looks like from a court perspective, that's really black and white and dry and dull, and it doesn't speak to creativity or the nuances of how you could divide things up. But if you get people to say what they want their life to look like, we can then start to put some real bones around that. We can start to sort of paint that in, and we can start to get something that looks and feels like a target. And then you can start to actually come to an agreement based on both people getting as much of what they want from, their vision as we can possibly manage with their shared assets. So I like that idea. It feels very congruent with the kind of way that we work. So what are some of the simple hygiene habits for talking about money? What do we need? Do we need to talk about joint accounts very quickly? How do partners create that psychological safety so money conversations don't become conflict conversations?
I've really, really reflected on this question and wondering what have I seen with customers that I've worked with that appear to do really well, and equally what have I seen that doesn't look like it does too well. So one of the kind of starting tips I think I would have for anybody listening, if you're in a relationship and finances aren't a common topic and you feel like it's not too clear if you're both approaching your finances in similar ways or from a shared kind of view, I would try to actually schedule a little bit of time in for the two of you to have a money conversation. And some people listening might all of a sudden think, goodness, that's terrifying. The thought of us booking in 15 minutes tomorrow to talk about finances. I'd say give it a go. And I think you'd be surprised how much you learn from each other. And the reason that scheduling that time in can be powerful is one of the alternatives for doing that could be to try and spring the conversation on a partner relatively out of the blue. And the risk of doing that is that you could time it really badly if someone's had a rubbish day. If someone's feeling a little nervous about something, maybe, work has been really rubbish on that day, you could end up getting a response back that actually isn't reflective of someone's, intentions. So trying to reserve some designated time can be really, really a really powerful way to begin. And then the other tip I would have for finance hygiene is don't try and solve or discuss every element of finances in one conversation. It's not going to happen. And what I would try to do is pick a topic. Now, whether that topic is how are we going to save for that great holiday next year, or what should we do about that credit card, just try to focus on that. And if you try to solve everything, I find you end up solving nothing. You'll end up kind of talking about pensions. Maybe you'll talk about the mortgage as well, and ultimately not feel like you've made a great amount of progress. And so my two immediate hygiene tips were reserve some time and pick a very specific topic, at least to get the ball rolling. And something else that popped into my head hearing you talk about that is, again, this concept of kind of writing down and documenting. If you're in a relationship, what are the goals, the kind of shared goals that exist through that? Because that really is your kind of, you could call it a bit of a totem pole when you're going through these situations where perhaps two people are approaching finances slightly differently, those shared goals and future events that both make life worth living are ultimately your motivator to hopefully make some changes and compromise slightly.
Yeah. I think having those goals is really important once you've separated your finances as well, because again, there's always a tendency when we talk about finances in divorce. I think most of us would accept we're going to be poorer financially in the aftermath of a divorce. But that's the aftermath. That doesn't have to be the forever after part. And I think sometimes we fall into the trap of just thinking that once divorced, that's it. That's the end of our financial kind of aspirations that we had. But I see a lot of people with that tenacity to want to rebuild and recreate. And I think it's really important to somehow, and it's a timing thing because in the aftermath of divorce, the overwhelm is huge and you're exhausted and you just want to lie in a corner with a blanket over your head and everything go away. And if you've done a Form E or you've done a financial disclosure, the last thing you want to do is start looking at your finances again. But actually, a session with a money coach, a few months after the dust has settled, can be such an uplifting experience. I know we've sent people from Amicable to Octopus Money, and the reports we get back about it just making people feel like there's a future and it's positive, and they've got small steps and a small plan about just how to save, even if it's just saving a tiny amount. And it's like you feel at the point of divorce, you're never going to be able to save anything again. Everybody feels like they're on the breadline because the financial circumstances have changed. But actually, it's just having that one small goal and that one desire. Maybe it's just an ISA that you put a very small amount of money in, but you've done it and now you're a saver. And your whole conception of yourself will change because you've done that one small act. And I don't think you can underestimate the importance of how you internally feel about yourself and how you can use a divorce or a separation to redefine your relationship with money.
I could not agree more. Both in terms of the power of that small step and understanding that there is a future that can be built. And the other point that I have personally experienced time and again with individuals who have separated is that there seems to be a theme of that person feeling like they need to be the expert now on everything and need to know all the answers. And, I can't believe I don't know how to do that. And I'm going to have to learn this straight away. But I think there is power in speaking to someone and just being told, look, it's okay that you don't know all these answers straight away. And it's okay that these are new concepts or you're building afresh. There is help here and you can get people on your side like Octopus Money, but as I mentioned, many other services. You don't need to be alone as you go through this. We can help you build that future that's going to make you really happy.
I think that's a really valuable point because, again, when you're doing a service like Amicable and you're negotiating directly with your ex, if your ex is in finance or negotiates for a living or something like that, it is very easy to feel that you are outgunned from the minute you start. The number of times we have, and I'm sorry to say, is still often the male who works in finance and will come and say, I've done a spreadsheet of all our assets. And I've got a wife sitting there who's like thinking, is that all our assets? How do I know that? I don't want to say that because then that will set everything sour and people will think I'm not being trusting. But I think we have to distinguish the idea it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say you don't understand. And it's definitely okay to say, can I see some evidence of that? And can you show me where that is so I know for myself without that being, a slight on someone's character or, a provocative statement. So I think trying to have an open conversation about it being okay and normalizing people wanting to have a good understanding of the finances is really important. It's otherwise you're in danger of making an agreement with somebody based on their interpretation of the finances without you feeling you can question it and without you feeling like that is the right settlement for you. So I think that's kind of important too, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah, I could not agree more. I think especially when it comes to your own finances, that there is no such thing as a silly question. But I wholly recognize, again, it's maybe human nature that can feel really nerve wracking to try and ask those questions. And I think you said it perfectly there. It can come across as accusatory to ask a question and ask for evidence. But the nature of finances is that, they belong to you, and no one's going to do a better job than you about caring about the truth that sits behind them. So yeah, questions, questions, questions.
Yeah. And sitting with somebody, whether that's somebody from Octopus Money or whether it's somebody from Amicable, where you've got that third person to be able to explain some of that or ask the questions on your behalf, from a perspective of, well, we need to see that evidence. Where have you got that figure from? Let's talk through what that looks like. Tell me how you've come to that. Is there anything, it's much easier for a third person to ask that sometimes in the sort of complexities of a divorce negotiation or a separation negotiation. It sounds to me like, from what you're saying, if you can get these open conversations going during the relationship, when the relationship is strong, you're going to have a simpler ride. I'm never going to use the word easy when it comes to divorce. You're going to have a simpler ride when it comes to then having to list out all of your finances and get your head around what you own, what you owe as a family. But let's say you haven't been able to do that. So you're coming at this, from your two separate spaces. What can people do when they know that the relationship is breaking down to prepare and get their finances in good order?
Three things probably come to mind to try and make that process easier, but I couldn't agree more. Not easy by any means. And I think the first thing we have already mentioned, questions are really important. So if you're in a relationship where you feel like you can still ask the question around where things are currently held, how do we view them? What are they currently valued at? Whose name are they in? Those are all very, very sensible questions if you're in a position where you can ask them. So I think trying to get yourself to a kind of foundation of understanding of where things are is a really, really great first step. I think following that, don't be afraid to ask for help. So services like Amicable, Octopus Money, and as I've mentioned before, free services are on hand to help you at least understand potentially what assets or account types or finances might be held within the relationship. Now, the good news in the kind of current day and age is that the majority of investments or savings that people hold should be readily accessible in terms of information. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain situations where some investments are going to be trickier to get information or evaluation out of. And I wouldn't then discount the power of independent support from experts to try and help with that. And equally, even if it is a slightly simpler type of investment, like a stocks and shares ISA or a workplace pension, even then I recognize that those are going to be new concepts and new account types to many people. So I really wouldn't discount how powerful third party help can be throughout that. And then the final point I think I would say about, if you are in a position where a relationship is breaking down and you're starting to think about the financial side of things, it is still keeping in mind your own plan. Now, think about not only, the months coming up, but perhaps even the years beyond. And I think those are worthwhile things to keep in mind, that in my experience of separation, it can feel like the destination when in reality it's not. It will, even though it won't feel like it, it is a step in a life. And so that plan can help keep that a little bit of context within that kind of framework.
Brilliant. Thank you. In just a moment, Tom will share his top tips for couples on how to improve financial transparency, and you wouldn't want to miss those. But before that, if this episode has given you even a bit of clarity or a snap of comfort or just a tip that made things feel a little bit more manageable, please make sure to follow the Divorce Podcast on your favourite podcast app. Each week, we're here with expert advice and real support to help you through your separation one step at a time. Okay then, Tom, for couples who want to improve their financial transparency, what are your top 3 practical steps that they can start with today?
So, tip number one, keeping it really brief, try and schedule in time to have the conversation about finances. Tip number two, pick 3 goals that are going to make shared goals that get you both really, really excited about the future. And tip 3, try to get to a foundation of understanding what you currently hold and where. And I think those 3 things will stand people in really good stead.
That's brilliant. Imagine if everybody did that, it would be so much more straightforward when it came to separating assets, if everybody came to the table with that kind of understanding. That's not to say that obviously people have their own roles in relationships, but if you want that financial transparency and you want to know what good looks like, I don't think you can do better than to follow Tom's tips. So thank you very much indeed, Tom. Where can people find out more information about you and Octopus Money?
Yeah, so Octopus Money available online. You can book in a session with us, and equally, if you want to send me a message, you can actually find me on most social media platforms at Plan with Tom as well.
Fantastic. And don't forget, for separation and co-parenting support, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore lots of our tools and free resources, or book a free advice consultation too. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can hear more about new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates on your favorite listening platform or thedivorcepodcast.com. Finally, we'd love to know how we can help further. So you can also share questions on divorce, separation, and co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. Thank you so much for joining me, Tom. It was really interesting talking all things finance and transparency. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.